You ever find something that just feels wrong? Something that doesn't belong? Not just out of place, but like it fell from another world and landed right at your feet, carrying a storm you can't even see yet. That's how it started for Delaney Ray Cormack, out in Dust Hollow, Arizona, 1883, a place the sun forgot to love and the rain forgot to visit. Delaney stood on her porch, which sagged like a tired old man, and watched the wind play with the bones of her farm. The well was dry, the hens were on strike, and her two kids, Rory and June Bug, were all she had left in a world that had already taken their pa. Rory was out in the gulch looking for deadwood, a thankless job for a boy his age. But in Dust Hollow, every hand had to work. A few minutes later, he came running back, face red, shirt flapping, skinnier than a fence post, but moving like a lightning strike. Ma! Ma, you gotta see this! Delaney met him halfway, her boots crunching on dirt so hard it sounded like broken glass. If it ain't water, Rory, it better be a miracle. He didn't have a miracle. He had something else. He opened his small, dusty hand, and lying in his palm was a cartridge casing. But this wasn't some regular brass shell. No, sir. This thing was silver, polished, and near the primer, it had this strange little starburst etched into it. Looked expensive, looked dangerous. Found it up near Split Rock, Rory said, breathless. Under a greasewood bush. Ain't from any gun we got. Delaney took it. It was heavy. Too heavy. This wasn't a rancher's bullet. This was custom work. The kind of thing a man with a lot of money and a lot of enemies would carry. The kind of thing that didn't just wander into Dust Hollow by accident. You see any tracks? She asked, her voice low. Rory nodded. Some. Not fresh. Looked like somebody was limping, dragging one foot. Delaney's eyes drifted toward the gulch, toward the red cliffs where shadows grew long and secrets went to die. A rich man, a wounded man, limping his way through her backyard. She tucked the silver shell into her apron pocket, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. She didn't know it yet, but that little piece of metal wasn't just a clue. It was a seed, and trouble was about to grow. That afternoon, the wind got hotter, carrying a smell of sage and something else. Smoke. And right on cue, old man Buckner came riding up on his mule. Buckner was the kind of man who'd charge you for the air you breathed if he could figure out how to put a fence around it. He owned the land Delaney's cabin sat on, and he never let her forget it. He didn't even tie up his mule, just swung off with a grunt and stepped onto her porch like he was measuring it for a coffin. Delaney, he drawled, taking off his hat like he was a gentleman, which he wasn't, came to give you fair word. You're 10 days late on the rent. She didn't flinch. Ain't no rain, Buckner. Ain't no crops. Not my concern, he said, leaning against the post. His eyes, small and greedy, scanned her property. Got folks looking to lease this patch for mining access. Someone's looking for basalt veins up in them hills. They got cash. You got dust. But then he said something that made the hair on Delaney's arm stand up. He glanced toward the gulch where Rory had found the casing. Word is, some important folks might be passing through, looking for something, or someone. Be a shame if a poor widow and her kids got in the way. He was fishing, and Delaney knew it. She kept her face like stone. I just need time, she said. You got 10 days, he repeated. He tipped his hat, climbed back on his mule, and rode off, leaving a trail of dust and threats behind him. June Bug came out right after he was gone. Was that about the land? She asked, her voice quiet. She never cried, that girl. Not since her pa died. She just got stronger. Delaney nodded. It was. June Bug slipped her little hand into her mother's. Then we best start praying, or planting, or both. Delaney didn't answer. She was watching a storm building out west. But it wasn't a rainstorm. It was dust, red as blood. And as the sky turned the color of a fresh wound, she pulled the silver bullet from her pocket. Buckner's words echoed in her head. Important folks. Looking for someone. The wounded man. The man with the silver bullets. She didn't know if he was salvation or ruin, but he was out there, and he was coming. The dust storm hit Dust Hollow like a fist from God. The sky went from red to black in a matter of minutes. The wind screamed, peeling paint off the cabin and ripping shingles from the barn roof. It was a physical thing, a monster made of grit and fury that wanted to swallow them whole. Delaney had just slammed the last shutter closed when she realized it. The porch was empty. Roy was gone. It was, "June Bug, keep the kettle hot!" She yelled over the howl of the wind, grabbing her scarf and the old shotgun she kept by the door. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. That boy, that damn curious boy. She saw a flicker of movement through the red haze, small, low to the ground, dashing towards Split Rock, the very place he'd found the bullet. Delaney leaned into the wind and ran. Roy hadn't meant to wander off. He'd just been poking around the dry arroyo, looking for anything the wind hadn't already claimed. But the storm had kicked up so fast, blinding him, turning his world into a swirl of red chaos. And that's when he saw it. Through the dust, a splash of something dark, something wet, glistening, blood. He crept closer. It was fresh, still tacky. He saw a trail where something heavy had been dragged, curving behind a fat barrel cactus. His heart hammered in his chest, a mix of fear and a boy's unbreakable curiosity. He followed the trail, and there, behind a mess of brittle sagebrush, lay a man. He was face down in the sand. One leg was twisted under him at an angle that made Rory's stomach turn. A dark stain was spreading across the back of his vest, right under his shoulder. Another was blooming at his waist. He looked like he'd been thrown from a great height and broken on the desert floor. His fine black hat lay a few feet away, crushed and full of grit. Rory froze. Was he dead? He looked dead. But then the man's fingers twitched, just a little. A flicker of life in the middle of all that death. Rory didn't hesitate. He turned and ran like the devil himself was on his heels. Delaney saw him coming, a small ghost in the red storm. He crashed into her, wheezing, coughing up dust, his words lost in the wind. "A man!" he finally choked out, pointing back toward the bluff. "He's bleeding real bad. He's not dead." Delaney didn't need to hear another word. They fought their way back through the storm together, rags over their faces, leaning low against the gusts. When she saw the body, she stopped dead in her tracks. He looked worse than Rory had described. His skin was scorched by the sun, his lips cracked and bleeding. His boots were torn to shreds. He was a broken heap of a man. But even then, even half dead in the dirt, he looked important. Maybe it was the fine stitching on his shirt cuffs, visible through the grime, or the single silver spur still buckled to his left boot. Or maybe, just maybe, it was the belt. It was deep brown leather, and it was lined with black pearls. Dozens of them, each the size of a pea, gleaming like dark eyes even through the blood and dust. Who was this man? Delaney knelt beside him, her practical nature taken over. She brushed the dirt from his face. He was maybe in his mid-30s with a strong jaw hidden under a few days of stubble. There was a kind of nobility there, buried beneath all the pain. She pressed her fingers to his neck. A pulse. Weak, but it was there. "Help me lift him," she said to Rory. It was a nightmare dragging him through the storm. He was heavy, a dead weight of muscle and bone. They finally got him onto the old broken-down wagon behind the barn, a wreck of a thing held together with wire and desperation, much like their lives. June Bug was at the door, her eyes wide as saucers. "Is he dead?" "No," Delaney grunted. "But he might be by sundown. Get water boiled, and bring the bandages from the trunk." As she settled the stranger into the wagon bed, something fell from his coat pocket, a folded slip of paper, stained with blood and grit. Delaney's fingers, clumsy with urgency, opened it. The ink was smeared. Half the words were gone, but she could make out a few. Inheritance, El Paso, ledger, truth. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't have time for riddles. She didn't have room for outlaws. But as she looked from the unconscious man to the cryptic note, she knew one thing for certain. Fate hadn't just dropped this man in her path. It had thrown him, and her life and the lives of her children were about to be thrown right along with him. Later that night, the storm passed, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and silent. The only sound in the small cabin was the stranger's shallow breathing. Delaney sat beside him, a wet cloth in one hand, the torn piece of paper in the other. She hadn't told the kids about the note. Some secrets were too heavy for small shoulders. The man stirred. His lips moved, murmuring something she couldn't catch. Then his eyes flickered open. They were dark blue, and they were filled with a wild, cornered animal terror. "Don't move," she said, her voice softer than she intended. "You're safe. For now." His gaze locked on hers, a flicker of understanding, a flicker of confusion. Then it faded, and he slipped back under the waves of unconsciousness. Delaney looked at him, this puzzle of a man made of fine clothes, black pearls, and bullet holes. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what kind of trouble was following him like a shadow, but she had a feeling it was the same kind of trouble that had sent Buckner to her door. The man they started calling Cassian, he'd muttered the name once in a fever dream, lay under the tin roof for 2 full days, hovering between life and death. Delaney did what she could. She cleaned his wounds with vinegar and boiled water, packed the holes with mashed prickly pear and yarrow, and stitched his skin back together with a needle and thread meant for mending dresses, not men. Outside, the world was just as unforgiving. The last of their cornmeal was gone. The hens had given up. Rory's face was getting thinner, and June Bug's dress hung on her like a sack. Every time Delaney looked at the sleeping stranger, a cold fear washed over her. Whatever storm had nearly killed him, she'd invited it right into her home, and it was only a matter of time before it started raining on them too. That night thunder rolled in the hills, the heavy kind, the kind that brought hail and wind sharp enough to strip the bark off a tree. Inside, Cassian tossed in his cot, his face slick with sweat. He started talking again, his voice a low, urgent murmur in the dark. Creed, El Paso, Ledger. June Bug, who was curled up on a quilt nearby, sat up straight. "What's he saying, Mama?" "Nothing, baby. He's just dreaming," Delaney whispered. But she was listening with every fiber of her being. The next words came out louder, clearer, sharper. "Wade lies. He burned the land." June Bug's breath hitched. Delaney's hand froze. She stared at the stranger's face, at his jaw twitching, his left hand clenching, like it was grabbing for a gun that wasn't there. "He burned it all," Cassian groaned, "to bury the truth." "Whose truth, Mama?" June Bug whispered, her voice trembling. Delaney didn't have an answer. She just pulled the quilt tighter around her daughter and watched as the rain started hammering the tin roof like 1,000 tiny gunshots. By the third day, Cassian's fever broke. He was weak, but he was alive. Delaney fed him thin stew and weak coffee. He couldn't keep much down, but it was a start. Rory, who'd been keeping his distance, started watching him from behind door frames, his eyes full of a boy's sharp observation. "He's got a scar on his hand," Rory announced one morning. "An old one. From a knife, maybe. He ain't new to trouble." "Neither are we," Delaney murmured, her eyes flicking to the Bible where she'd hidden the note. Everything about the man spelled trouble. She'd found his gun, a Colt .45 with custom silver etching, tucked away in his saddle roll. It was loaded, oiled, and looked like it had been used recently. That gun cost more than her whole damn farm. And that belt with the black pearls? No simple ranch hand wore a belt like that. She'd hidden the gun under a floorboard, but she couldn't hide the unease it gave her. Still, there was something else about him. A quiet grit, a sadness that seemed to live deep in his bones. He wasn't just a gunslinger. He was something more. On the 5th morning, she walked in and found him awake. Really awake. His eyes were blurry, but they were tracking her. "You're in Dust Hollow," she said, her voice even. "Arizona territory. My boy found you near Split Rock. Bleeding." He gave a slow, pained nod. "You remember your name?" His voice was a dry rasp, like stones scraping together. "Cassian. Creed." Delaney's hand stilled. "Creed? That's supposed to mean something to me?" He didn't answer. His eyes drifted to the corner where June Bug was sketching on a piece of scrap paper with a lump of coal. The ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "She looks like my sister," he whispered. "Used to." Delaney just poured him a little more coffee. He took it with a shaking hand, nodded his thanks, and sipped. As their eyes met over the tin cup, something passed between them. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was a start. It was the kind of quiet understanding that happens between two people who both walk through their own kind of hell and still have the ash under their fingernails to prove it. But the quiet wasn't going to last. She knew it. He knew it. The hell he was running from was about to find them. The morning haze hadn't even burned off the hills when they rode in. Three of them. They came on lean, dust-colored horses, moving not like ranchers but like wolves. Their faces were covered with bandanas, their hats pulled low, and they didn't come from the main road. They came from the canyon trail, the back way, the way you come when you don't want to be seen. Delaney spotted them from the porch. Her hand went right to the derringer she kept tucked in her apron pocket. It was a small comfort, but it was something. "June bug, Rory," she said, her voice calm but tight. "Root cellar. Now. Don't make a sound." They scrambled away without a word. They knew that tone in their mother's voice. It was the tone that meant danger wasn't coming anymore. It was here. Inside, Cassian was awake. He was weak, but he heard the horses. He was already trying to push himself up, his face a mask of pain and grim determination. The lead rider swung down from his horse. He was a big man, with a kind of oily politeness that was more threatening than an open snarl. "Ma'am," he said, his eyes flicking past her, trying to see inside the dark cabin. "We're tracking a wounded man. Stranger might have passed this way. Name of Creed. Seen anything odd?" So they knew his name. Delaney's blood ran cold. She kept her face like a stone wall. "We don't get many visitors in Dust Hollow." "That's so?" the man sneered. "Place like this. I reckon you'd remember if a man bleeding all over the desert stumbled past your door." "Plenty of things pass through here," she said, her voice as dry as the dirt at her feet. "Mostly wind. And coyotes." The second man, a tall, skinny fellow with dead eyes, started circling the yard. He moved slow, deliberate, taking in every detail. The barn, the water barrel. He paused by the chicken coop. "Just hens in there?" he asked, not even looking at her. "Just hens," Delaney lied, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. The third man just sat on his horse, silent, watching her. He was the one that scared her the most. He looked patient. He looked like he'd wait all day for her to make one wrong move. But here's the thing they didn't know. They weren't the only ones watching. Behind the barn, crouched low beneath a broken wheelbarrow, was Rory. He'd seen them coming and had slipped out the back, quick and quiet as a field mouse. He held his breath as the skinny man's boots scraped the dirt just inches from his hiding spot. The man's shadow fell over him. He paused. Rory thought his heart was going to explode. But then he did something brilliant, something Delaney never would have thought of. He let his jaw go slack, pulled his bottom lip over his teeth, and let out a soft, wheezy little sigh. He made himself look simple, harmless, a dumb kid you wouldn't look at twice. It worked. "Just a dumb one," the man muttered to himself and walked on. Rory didn't move a muscle until they were all back in front of the house. The leader swung back onto his horse. "Well, if you do see him," he said, locking his eyes on Delaney, "you tell him Wade Harlan sends his regards. Got a lot of folks looking to have a word with him. Be a real shame if a nice family got caught in the crossfire." Then they were gone, their dust trail curling into the canyon like a hangman's rope. That evening, the air in the cabin was thick with unspoken questions. Delaney stood by Cassian's cot, her arms crossed tight. "They came," she said. It wasn't a question. Cassian pushed himself up against the wall, his face pale, a sheen of sweat on his brow. "How many?" "Three. Said they were hunting. Said a man named Wade Harlan sends his regards." Cassian let out a slow, painful breath. "Then they know I'm alive." "I need to know what you are," Delaney said, her voice hard. "Not who you're running from, what you are. What kind of trouble are you dragging through my door and setting at my children's feet?" He didn't look at her at first. He just stared at the little drawing of a flower Junebug had pinned to the wall. "My name is Cassian Creed," he finally said, his voice raw but firm. "Son of Ambrose Creed." He paused as if the name should mean something. "He used to run the largest longhorn operation in Texas. Owned land from Amarillo to the Sabine River. A ruthless man, but brilliant. Delaney just waited. My mother, Eleonora, she died when I was 15. They said it was fever. I never believed it. She wasn't sick. She was scared. And Wade Harland, he was our ranch foreman. He was always there, slithering around in my father's shadow. After Mama died, he got closer to my father, started making decisions. The books started looking wrong, money disappearing, land deeds going missing. He swallowed the memory like broken glass in his throat. I tried to tell my father. He sided with Wade, called me a liar, hit me so hard I tasted blood for a week. I left that night. Haven't been back since. And now you're back for revenge, Delaney stated. No, Cassian said, shaking his head. I'm back for the truth. 2 months ago, I got a letter. Anonymous. It said there was proof. Proof my mother was murdered. Proof Wade forged documents to steal everything after my father got sick. The letter said the truth was in El Paso, hidden in a ledger. Delaney moved to the table, opened the old family Bible, and pulled out the blood-stained scrap of paper. She handed it to him. You mean this? His hand trembled as he took it. His eyes widened. That's it. It's real. He looked up at her, his blue eyes burning with a fire she hadn't seen before. He shot me to stop me from getting to that ledger. He thinks I'm dead in the desert. He thinks he's won. Delaney looked at him, at the dirt and the wounds and the fierce, stubborn hope in his eyes. She didn't fully trust him. Not yet, but she believed him. And in a place like Dust Hollow, sometimes belief was the only weapon you had. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. It was the kind of silence that comes before a storm breaks, a heavy, waiting kind of stillness. Cassian was healing, slow but steady. He was getting his strength back, an inch at a time. The kids started to orbit him, drawn to his quiet sadness like moths to a lonely flame. One morning, he was sitting with Rory under the big mesquite tree, showing him how to rig a snare out of wire in a bent sapling. A rabbit, he said, his voice still rough. He don't run straight when he's scared. He zigs and he zags. You gotta think like he thinks, not like you think. Rory nodded, serious as a judge. How'd you get so smart, Cassian? A faint, sad smile touched Cassian's lips. Been running like a rabbit most of my life, kid. Later, June Bug came up to him, shyly clutching a piece of paper. It's a poem, she whispered. For you. He took it from her like it was made of solid gold. He read it, then read it again. He looked her right in the eye. This is the first kind thing anyone's given me in 10 years, June Bug. She beamed, a smile so bright it could have lit up the whole dark cabin, and she skipped away. Cassian watched her go, and Delaney saw a look on his face she hadn't seen before. It wasn't just gratitude. It was a deep, aching kind of loss, a longing for a life he never got to have. That evening, they sat on the porch together, watching the sun bleed all over the Dragoon Peaks. I was born in a house with 12 fireplaces, Cassian said, his voice low. My mother loved books. We had a whole library full of them. My father, he didn't read. He built fences, cattle empires, a dynasty of blood and dust. He believed in bloodlines more than he believed in God. Delaney kept shelling beans into a tin pail, listening. I was 14 when she died, he went on. They called it fever, but I saw her the night before. She wasn't sick. She was terrified. She told me she'd seen Wade near her private ledger cabinet. She made me promise. She said if anything ever happened to her, I had to protect her books. Her truth. I was too young. I didn't understand what she meant. His jaw tightened. After the funeral, it was like a switch flipped. Wade was suddenly running everything. And my father, he just let him. When I tried to show him the discrepancies in the payroll ledgers, he backhanded me and told me to never speak my mother's name again. And so you left, Delaney said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. Lived out of my saddlebags ever since. Then I got that letter. It said a lawyer in El Paso, a man named Ellison Grady, was holding on to my mother's real ledger, the one with all the proof. So you went looking for him, Delaney finished, and got shot for your trouble. Right through the side, Cassian confirmed, touching his bandaged ribs. They knew I was coming. It was an ambush. They left me for dead. They sat in silence for a long time, the only sound the chirping of the crickets. I don't know why you helped me, he finally said, looking at her. His eyes in the twilight were dark and deep. Delaney's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know why I didn't leave you where you fell. The next morning, something shifted. Cassian was up before the sun, and though he still limped, there was a new purpose in his step. He started working. He hauled boards to patch the barn. He mucked out the stable. He rehung a gate that had been leaning for a year. He moved with a quiet efficiency, the way a man who knows hard work moves. Delaney watched him from the kitchen window. He was a man of contradictions, raised with silver spoons, but his hands knew what a shovel felt like. He was a ghost from a world of wealth and power, but he looked at home here, in the dirt, in the struggle. That afternoon, the sky cracked open. A sudden, violent thunderstorm rolled in, bringing cold rain and the smell of wet earth. Rain! Delaney shouted from the garden patch, waving him toward the tool shed. He dropped his rake and ran. They slammed the door shut just as the heavens unleashed a torrent. The rain pounded on the tin roof, a deafening drumbeat that shut out the rest of the world. The little shed smelled of pine tar and damp soil. For a long moment, they just stood there, catching their breath, listening to the storm. Cassian chuckled, a low, rusty sound. Texas rain smells different. Arizona rain don't last long, Delaney said, shaking water from her hat. But it's honest. Their eyes met, and in the close, dim light of the shed, with the world being washed away outside, something sparked between them. It wasn't fire, not yet. It was slower, steadier. The warm, banking embers of two lonely souls finding a little bit of shelter in each other. You got a place to go? She asked, her voice soft. After this is all over? He looked away, out the one grimy window at the gray sheet of rain. If I make it to El Paso, and if that lawyer's still alive, maybe I'll have a name again. A life. A name's just a word, Delaney said, reaching for the old lantern on the wall. It's what you do with it that matters. Outside, the world was wind and water, but inside that little shed, they were a little closer than they'd been before. And they both knew, without saying a word, that they couldn't stay in Dust Hollow. Wade's men would be back, and next time, they wouldn't be asking questions. They left before the sun was even a rumor in the east. No goodbyes. There was no one to say goodbye to. Delaney just tied a rope across the gate, a silent warning for anyone who might wander by. The cabin looked small and lonely as they pulled away, the door swinging a little in the dawn wind. Delaney sat on the buckboard wagon, her shotgun across her lap. Cassian sat beside her, his jaw set, his hand never far from the Colt tucked in his coat. In the back, Rory and June Bug were huddled under a quilt, their faces pale and serious in the pre-dawn gloom, watching the familiar red cliffs of their whole world shrink behind them. The journey was brutal. The Sonoran Desert stretched out before them like a punishment, a vast expanse of pale sand, skeletal cacti, and a silence so deep it felt like it could swallow you whole. The sun was relentless, a white-hot eye in a bleached-out sky. Cassian knew the land, though. He'd ridden these trails before. We cut through Coyote Draw. We can make Dragoon Pass by nightfall, he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. It's rougher, but it keeps us off the main road. They made camp that night in the shelter of a rock overhang. After a meager dinner of jackrabbit and dried beans, Cassian pointed out the constellations to the kids, telling them stories his mother used to tell him. She called that one the Cattle King's Belt, he said, tracing the shape of Orion with his finger. She said when it leaned due south, it meant spring had really come. What was she like? Rory whispered from under his blanket. Cassian was quiet for a long moment, his eyes lost in the sea of stars. She smelled like cedar soap and cinnamon, he said, his voice thick with memory. She read books about ships but never once saw the ocean. She was too good for the world my father built. By the fifth night, the land began to change. They climbed into the pine forests at the base of the Dragoon Mountains. The air grew cold. A raw wind cut through the wagon boards. And that's when Rory got sick. It started with a whimper in his sleep. Then he started tossing and turning, his face flushed bright red. Delaney put her hand on his forehead and felt a terrifying heat. "He's burning up," she said. And for the first time, Cassian heard the sharp edge of panic in her voice. He was beside her in an instant. "It's a fever. The water, maybe. Or the heat from the trail." "I don't have enough willow bark," Delaney said, her voice tight with fear as she cradled her son's head. "Stay with him," Cassian said. And before she could argue, he disappeared into the dark, damp woods. He came back 20 minutes later, soaked from the drizzling rain, his hands full of wild yarrow and fresh pine needles. "My mother used this," he explained, his voice urgent, "when I caught river fever. Boil it. Make him drink the water." All through that long, dark night, Delaney held the tin cup to her son's lips while Cassian whispered stories to him, tales of ghost herds and Texas fireflies, his voice a low, soothing rumble against the moan of the wind. By dawn, the fever broke. Roy was sleeping peacefully, his breath easy and deep. Delaney looked over at Cassian, his face haggard in the gray light. She didn't say a word. She just reached out and put her hand on his arm. It was enough. They were packing up the wagon when he appeared. He stepped out from between two ancient pines, moving so silently he seemed to have materialized out of the mist itself. He was an old Apache man, his back straight as an arrow, his long braids streaked with silver. He wore a simple vest lined with bone buttons, and his eyes looked like they'd seen the birth of the mountains themselves. Cassian's hand went for his gun, but he stopped. There was no threat in the old man's posture, just a deep, profound stillness. "You ride with honor," the old man said, his voice a low echo in the quiet woods. "And the wind does not run from your trail." Delaney stepped forward. "We mean no harm. We're just passing through, headed for El Paso." The old man nodded slowly. "I know. I have watched from the ridge. I saw the boy shake with the sickness. I saw the man boil pine and yarrow instead of filling him with whiskey. That is the way of one raised right." He turned his piercing gaze on Cassian. "Your mother's name was Eleanor Creed." Cassian's jaw dropped. How did you know that?" "She saved my people," the old man said simply. "Long ago, a sickness came to our village, the white man's disease. Your father's men would have let us die, but she came. She brought medicine. My wife lived because of her. My son lived. I have owed her a debt for many years." Cassian swallowed hard. "She never told me." "Kindness does not need to brag," the Apache said. He motioned to the south. "There is a path through the red rocks, a trail you will not find on any white man's map. Traders and thieves used it. They call it the Red Hollow. It is dangerous, but it will take you to El Paso 2 days faster than the wagon road, and much, much quieter." He paused, his eyes locking with Cassian's. "The men who hunt you are not behind you. They are ahead. They wait for you on the main road, near the San Pedro crossing. They have set a trap." Delaney felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. A trap. They'd been riding right into it. "If you are truly her son," the old man said, "then you will take the path through the Red Hollow. It is where your truth is waiting." He gave a final solemn nod. "My name is Greyhawk, and my debt to Eleanor Creed is now paid." And just as silently as he had appeared, he turned and vanished back into the trees. Cassian stood there for a long time, staring at the spot where Greyhawk had been. "Red Hollow," Delaney said, breaking the silence. "What do you think?" He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, she saw a flicker of something that wasn't haunted or hunted. It was hope. "I think," he said, "it's the only way we're going to make it." El Paso was a shock to the system. After weeks in the empty desert, the city was a noisy, grimy explosion of life. It smelled of gunpowder, sweat, and cheap tequila. Men with guns on their hips swaggered down dusty streets, and the sound of a saloon piano was never far away. Cassian guided them to the south end of town, a forgotten corner where the houses were little more than shacks pieced together from scrap lumber and rusted tin. It was here, in a lean-to that smelled of turpentine and despair, that they found Ellison Grady. He wasn't what Delaney expected. The man Cassian had described, A sharp lawyer in a clean suit was gone. In his place was a gnarled old man hunched over a workbench, carving a piece of wood. A thick white scar sliced down the left side of his face, pulling one eye into a milky blind stare. But his right eye was as sharp and green as a shard of broken bottle glass, and it was narrowed on Cassian with pure, undiluted suspicion. "Well, hell," Grady muttered, his voice like gravel. "I heard you were dead." "Someone tried real hard to make it so," Cassian said, stepping inside. Delaney followed, keeping the kids close behind her hand on her shotgun. Grady tossed his carving knife onto a pile of wood shavings. "That someone have a name?" "Wade Harland." Grady let out a short, harsh laugh that turned into a cough. "Should have guessed. That snake always had more ambition than spine." He limped over to a heavy wooden cabinet that was secured with 3 separate locks. "You think you're the first to come looking for this? Harlan's had men sniffing around El Paso for months. They know I have it. They just don't know where I am." He looked them up and down, his one good eye lingering on Delaney and the children. "Who are they?" "They saved my life," Cassian said simply. That seemed to be enough for Grady. He fumbled with a ring of keys and began unlocking the cabinet. "You know what this is, boy?" he said, his voice dropping low. "This ain't just a book. It's a lit stick of dynamite. It's got receipts, signatures, letters your mother wrote. It's proof that everything your father owned, the land, the cattle, the name, was supposed to pass to you, not to that viper he trusted more than his own son." He pulled out a thick, leather-bound ledger. It was old and cracked, but the pages inside looked crisp and dry. "Your mama knew," Grady said, his voice softer now. "She knew Wade would try to silence her. That's why she brought this to me, weeks before she caught that fever. She told me to hold it, to keep it safe until the boy with her eyes came back for it." He handed the heavy book to Cassian. Cassian took it like it was a holy relic, his fingers tracing the worn leather. He opened it, and Delaney saw pages filled with elegant, precise handwriting. "There's a catch," Grady said, shattering the moment. Cassian looked up, his eyes sharp. "This book ain't enough on its own. Not against the kind of money Wade Harlan can throw around. You need to face him, and you need to face your father." Grady leaned forward, his one good eye glaring. "Ambrose Creed is in Tombstone. He's set to testify in a public hearing on behalf of Wade Harlan. He's going to legally sign over the last of the Creed holdings. He thinks you're dead. He thinks Wade is the only loyal man he has left." "When?" Cassian asked, his voice tight. "June 1st, Grady said. "Less than a week from now. You show up in that courtroom, you put this ledger in front of that judge, and the whole damn house of cards Wade built is going to come tumbling down." Cassian's jaw was set like granite. "Then we ride for Tombstone." "Not so fast," Grady grunted, peering out his grimy window. "You think you just get to walk out of here? Harlan's men are crawling all over this town. 2 of them have been sitting across the street, watching my shack for the last 3 days." Delaney's stomach dropped. They had walked right into another trap. "There's a back way," Grady said, pointing to a loose board in the floor. "Leads to an old smuggler's tunnel. Comes out by the river. It's your only chance." He grabbed an old shotgun from the corner. "Now get moving." "And Creed?" Cassian paused at the opening. "You give that bastard Harlan one for me." They made it to the river, scrambling through the dark, foul-smelling tunnel. But just as they broke out into the moonlight, a voice cut through the night. "Going somewhere, Creed?" 2 men stepped out from the shadows of the cottonwood trees. They had rifles, and they were pointed right at them. "Just hand over the book," one of them said, a greasy smile on his face, "and maybe we'll let the lady and her kids walk away." Delaney didn't hesitate. She shoved Junebug and Rory behind her and raised her shotgun. But Cassian was faster. He moved like a blur of desert lightning. His Colt was in his hand, and it barked once. A single deafening crack in the night. The man with the greasy smile grunted, a look of pure surprise on his face, and then he crumpled to the ground. The second man panicked. He fired wildly. A hot, searing pain tore through Delaney's shoulder. She staggered back with a cry, but she kept her shotgun level. Cassian spun, his face a cold, hard mask. He fired again. The second man screamed and dropped his rifle, clutching a shattered leg. And then, silence. The only sounds were the rushing of the river, Rory's frightened sobs, and the ragged sound of their own breathing. Cassian stood over the fallen men, the barrel of his Colt still smoking. His eyes found Delaney's. "You okay?" he asked, his voice strained. She nodded, clutching her bleeding arm, her face pale but her eyes fierce. "You?" He looked down at the gun in his hand, then at the two men on the ground. A muscle twitched in his jaw. "First man I've killed in 6 years," he said, his voice hollow. He holstered the pistol. He knew it wouldn't be the last. Tombstone. The name itself felt like a bad omen. It wasn't a town so much as a monument to greed and violence, a place where the dirt was soaked in blood and whiskey. Every man you passed on the street had a gun on his hip and a calculating look in his eye. They rode in slow, the buckboard wagon looking pitiful and out of place amongst the fancy carriages and fine horses. Delaney's arm was bandaged, and she sat tall beside Cassian, her shotgun still across her lap. Cassian looked like a ghost, his face grim, the dust of the trail making him look older, harder. The precious ledger was wrapped in oilcloth and tucked securely in his saddlebag. The courthouse was a big, ugly brick building that looked like it had been built to withstand a siege. Inside, the air was thick and hot, smelling of stale cigar smoke and nervous sweat. The room was packed, and there, at the plaintiff's table, sat Ambrose Creed. He was in a wheeled chair, a shrunken version of the powerful man Cassian had described. His hair was silver, his hands trembled on the head of a polished cane, but his eyes were the same cold, cruel blue Cassian remembered, and they were filled with a lifetime of arrogance and pride. Beside him stood Wade Harlan. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his shoulders squared, a look of smug confidence on his face, but Delaney saw the faint sheen of sweat on his upper lip. He looked like a man who was trying too hard to convince everyone, including himself, that he was in control. The judge, a craggy old man named Bellamy Withers, was reading from a document in a monotone voice. He was about to make it official, about to sign away the last remnants of the Creed legacy to a murderer and a thief. And then the courtroom doors swung open. A wave of silence washed over the room as Cassian strode down the aisle. He walked with a purpose that parted the crowd like the Red Sea. Ambrose Creed's jaw went tight. His knuckles turned white on his cane. Wade Harlan turned a sickly shade of gray. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost walk through the wall. Judge Withers slammed his gavel down. "Who in the hell are you, sir?" Cassian stopped right in front of the judge's bench. He didn't look at his father. He didn't look at Wade. He looked right at the judge. "My name," he said, his voice ringing with authority, "is Cassian Creed, son of Eleonora and Ambrose Creed, and I have evidence that this entire proceeding is based on a foundation of lies, forgery, and murder." The courtroom erupted in whispers. Wade staggered back, then found his voice. "That's a lie. This man is an imposter. Cassian Creed died near the Pecos River 5 years ago. I have the death certificate. I signed it myself." "You forged it, Wade," Cassian said, his voice cold as ice. "Just like you forged my father's will. Just like you forged the deed transfers. Just like you've been forging your whole damn life. You have proof of these allegations?" the judge asked, his eyes narrowing. Cassian unwrapped the ledger and placed it on the bench with a heavy thud. "This is my mother's personal ledger," he declared, "kept in her own hand. It details every transaction, every piece of land, every dollar that Wade Harlan has stolen from my family since the day she died." The judge opened the book. He flipped through the pages, his bushy eyebrows sinking lower and lower. "These entries, they don't match the official estate records. This is highly irregular." Wade's lawyers started shouting objections, but Cassian wasn't finished. He pulled another folded, yellowed piece of paper from his coat. "And this," he said, his voice cracking with an emotion he couldn't hold back, "is a letter my mother wrote the week before she died. She says if anything happens to her, Wade Harlan is the man who should be investigated." He handed the letter to the judge. Ambrose Creed leaned forward, his face ashen. "That handwriting," he whispered, his voice a hoarse croak. That's her paper. She always wrote on linen paper with that blue ink she had made special from indigo leaves. His cold facade finally cracked. My God. Eleonora. Doubt still hung in the air. A son's word against a trusted foreman's. A dead woman's letter. It might not be enough. And then, a small voice cut through the tension. Your Honor? Everyone turned. It was Junebug. She walked right up to the bench, small and fierce, and not the least bit intimidated. She was clutching the poem she had written for Cassian. I wrote this poem for Cassian, she said, her voice clear and steady. He kept it. He said it was the first kind thing he'd gotten in 10 years. She held up the crumpled piece of paper. The judge looked at the child's poem. He looked at the careful, loopy handwriting. Then he looked back at the elegant, sweeping script in the letter from Eleanor Creed. He took off his spectacles and polished them slowly. The handwriting's different, he said quietly, looking over his glasses at Wade. One is a grown woman's. The other is a child's. But the way they form their T's, the little curl on the end of the S, it's the same. Learned from the same hand. He looked at Junebug. This girl didn't forge anything. She's maybe 9 years old. He looked at Ambrose Creed, whose face had crumpled in on itself. A single tear traced a path through the wrinkles on his cheek. That's my son, Ambrose choked out, his voice thick with a decade of grief and regret. That's my boy. It was over. Wade knew it. He lunged for the door, a desperate, wild look in his eyes. Judge Withers slammed the gavel down so hard the whole room shook. Enough, he roared. Wade Harland, you are hereby under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and the attempted murder of Cassian Creed. Two marshals who had been standing by the wall moved fast. They grabbed Wade before he could make it 3 steps. He didn't fight. All the bluff and bluster had drained out of him, leaving behind nothing but a small, pathetic, terrified man. Cassian didn't even watch them drag him away. He just stood there, the weight of 10 long years finally lifting from his shoulders. He had his name back, but he was about to realize that a name wasn't what he really wanted after all. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the dusty streets of Tombstone in shades of gold and blood. Ambrose Creed wheeled himself out of the courthouse, stopping in front of his son. The arrogance was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, hollow shame. I was wrong, he said, his voice brittle as old paper. About her, about you. I let that man poison me against my own family. I was a fool. Cassian just stared at him, his face unreadable. You were blind, he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact. I was, Ambrose agreed. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But the land, the estate, it's yours. I'll sign it all back over to you. The Creed name is yours again. This was it, the moment Cassian had been fighting for. The wealth, the power, the legacy. It was all his for the taking. He shook his head. I don't want it, he said, and the words seemed to surprise even himself. I don't want the Creed estate, or the money, or the name that comes with it. Delaney stepped up beside him, her hand lightly brushing his. Rory and Junebug stood behind them, a small, fierce wall of loyalty. What will you do? Ambrose asked, his voice filled with a bewildered sadness. Cassian looked at Delaney. He looked at the 2 children who had trusted him, who had seen the good man buried under all the grit and pain. I'm going to build something, he said, something honest, with my own 2 hands. He turned and without another word walked away from the courthouse, away from his father, away from the life of privilege that had cost him so much. He wasn't Cassian Creed, the Texas cattle heir anymore. He was just Cassian, and for the first time in his life, that felt like enough. When their wagon rolled back into Dust Hollow, the place hadn't changed. The sun was still hot, the wind was still dry, the land was still lean and hard. But something was different. They were different. Cassian stepped down from the wagon and just stood there for a minute, looking out at the cracked earth. This was the place where he had crawled to die. The place where a stranger's kindness had saved him. It wasn't much, but it was the only place that had ever felt like home. He turned to Delaney, who was helping Rory down from the wagon. He smiled, a real smile, one that reached all the way to his eyes. "We'll build it right," he said. And they did. Cassian sold the legal rights to a small forgotten parcel of Creed land near the Pecos, just enough to get by. He bought seeds, lumber, and 2 sturdy mules. He and Delaney worked from sunup to sundown. They raised new fence posts where the old ones had rotted. They patched the leaky roof. They dug the well deeper until they hit a steady, clear stream of water that felt more precious than gold. Rory took to the work like he'd been born for it, his thin arms getting strong, his face tan and healthy. And June Bug, she painted a sign for the front gate in careful, crooked letters that were full of a child's pure-hearted pride. It didn't say Creed Ranch. It said June Bug Springs. One night, under a fat silver moon, Cassian found Delaney out by the new garden patch. He was holding a small velvet pouch. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice quiet. Inside was a simple silver necklace with a single, dark obsidian pendant. "She wore it on her wedding day. She told me once that real love shouldn't feel like thunder. It should feel like truth." Delaney's breath caught in her throat. He got down on one knee in the soft dirt. There was no preacher, no crowd, just the two of them, the big, silent desert, and a sky full of stars. "Marry me, Del," he said. "Let's build this place together. Let's raise these kids together." Rory and June Bug, who had been watching from the porch, came running over. "Say yes, Mama," June Bug whispered, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked. Delaney wasn't a woman who cried easily, but she was smiling, a smile so full of light it could have chased away every shadow in Dust Hollow. "Yes," she said. "Yes." A month later, they stood under an arbor they'd built themselves, wrapped in wild sage. Cassian placed the obsidian necklace around her neck. Delaney gave him a ring she'd fashioned from a silver dollar, flattened on the train tracks near Tucson. It fit perfectly. As the sun set, Rory stepped forward, holding a piece of paper. "Me and June Bug," he said, his voice serious. "We've been talking. We want your name, Cassian, but we want to keep Cormac, too, so folks don't forget where we come from." Cassian knelt, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "You'll always be Cormac's," he said, his voice thick, "and you'll always be mine." That night he signed the papers. Rory Cormac Creed, June Bug Cormac Creed. 2 children born in dust, now with a name that stood for a new beginning. The last thing Delaney planted was a row of morning glories all along the fence line. And every morning they opened up to the sun, brilliant splashes of blue and violet against the dry red earth. Sometimes Cassian would stand on the porch with a cup of coffee and just watch them. He'd been born to a life of immense wealth, land, cattle, power. But here, in this hard, forgotten corner of the world, with the 3 bravest hearts he'd ever known beaten beside his own, here he was finally rich. The desert had taught them all how to survive, but it took love to teach them how to bloom. If you reckon the West ain't just about 6-shooters and dusty trails, but about the quiet places where broken folks find a way to mend, and where strangers can turn into family, well then, partner, you found the right campfire. We tell stories here. Stories about honor and love, and the kind of quiet bravery that doesn't make the history books, but sure as hell makes a life worth living. There's another story blowing in on the next desert wind, so if you enjoyed this one, don't forget to subscribe. Kick off your boots, pour yourself something strong, and stick around. I'll be here waiting.